Well, in this next session, we'll be hearing about Oslo's public policy on diversity and anti-discrimination that goes well beyond social policy and seeks also to address attitudes. Please welcome to the stage Senior Advisor for the Department of Labour, Integration and Social Services at the Government of Oslo, Toralv Moe. Toralv, please come and join me on the stage. I think we're supposed to have 2 chairs.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We're going to do this one slightly different. So Toralv is going to give a little talk. Where am I going to sit? Over this side? And then we'll have a quick Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you for having this opportunity to be here in Vilnius and to hear about the story we heard from the mayor of Vilnius earlier on. And the story of Vilnius and the celebration of this letter of freedom and freedom movements, of freedom of thoughts 700 years ago, it's a great story. But it also reflects what cities is much about. If you go back to Athens or Alexandria or Rome in the ancient times, it was the same things that makes cities successful then as now. And that is what I've tried to talk about with the experience in Oslo. Oslo is a city with around 700,000 people. It has grown a lot in the last 40 years. And it's very diverse. It's about 1/3 of the population have another ethnic background than white Norwegian. If you go to the age groups below 20, that number would be 50%. And there's an open LGBT community, and also in this policy we have, it also encompasses the disabled. Try to make a comprehensive policy on this, but it's very diverse. And how do we make this a strength? We say it is a resource, and we say it is a necessity. It has to be a strength. And to make it a strength, you have to do something. You have to work for it. It's not automatic. You can say it's nice, it's good, it's human rights, it's equality, it's good values. You can say it's beneficial. If you remember, some 15 years ago, a guy called Richard Florida had this message to the business and university communities that tolerance, technology, and talent was connected. So to be an attractive city, you have to be tolerant. So it's beneficial. But we also say it's a necessity. And we say that if you don't know how to manage diversity, you're probably going to fail in a lot of areas. You'll not be a success. And there are cities around the world where this failure is made to the really significant and obvious decline of a city. I speak now for the vice mayor who was invited here, Rina Marianne Hansen. And in the political platform of the government of Oslo, we have a parliamentary local system of government. They say that Oslo shall be an open, inclusive, and tolerant city with equality and feminism as important values. And the government also states that diversity is a resource. And usually in Oslo, the parties that has this message win elections. It's on the xenophobic parties in Oslo are very small, and they don't win elections. So we have a story now going back to 2001 when we adopted what we call the Oslo policy, Oslo extra large, the city for all. And it's an obligation. It's an obligation as a municipality that our services and our employment policy should have the diversity as a value. And we also say that to the community, to the city as a community, that we should be role models in work against racism, homophobia, and ableism. So we worked with this for 20 years. Last year we had this, in December 2021, a new policy called Words Matter against hate speech, where we repeat much of the policies we had for the 20 years and strengthen them. And these plans, which encompass, as I said, LGBT policy, anti-racism, and also policies for the disabled, there's a common framework. First is that there's lots of training of employees. The municipality of Oslo has some 55,000 employees and maybe 4,000 managers. And how do you get all these people to know the right thing to do? It's a never-ending task, I can tell you. But you have to say it's their responsibility. The leaders of kindergartens, of health centers, schools, employment offices, all have to implement their own local strategy for recruitment and for equal services. The second target is protection against discrimination, and that is a hard one, because there is very few people going to the police and say, I complain, I was discriminated against. So there is a threshold. And the city has limited powers. It's usually the states and the courts and the police that have these powers. And then the last and third strategy is about celebration and visibility, to celebrate diversity. And this is a picture of one of the marches for LGBT in Oslo. But we try to do this in all areas, and to get this message on that diversity is something that you should appreciate, something that adds value to all, just not for minorities. It's enrich city life. So does this work? Do we reach our aims? In some research, we can see that attitudes are improving. As I said, you can have elections in Oslo and you win if you have this message. And in all areas there is improvement, and most people in Oslo, more than the majority, think that diversity adds value to their life, even if it's not, they are not necessarily a minority. So we can see that the relationship between the majority and different sorts of minorities improve. But we also have great problems. This picture is from a march that happened after a terrorist attack that targeted the Oslo Pride in June this year. And this was a great setback for the LGBT community in Oslo, because the lack of protection and the lack of the ability to march in the streets kind of confirmed that prejudice was the rule. So why do we say that this is a necessity for the city? There's lots of areas where we are not doing good. If you go to Oslo, it seems kind of segregated on ethnicity, on social economic means and so on. And if you ask people from minorities, 1 in 2 will say that they are discriminated against, and that it's changed their lives, that limits their chances in life, where they go to school, where they can work, where they want to live. So it's limits, and that is a lack of potential for the city. But we see that if we go into this and work with it, we can improve our services. We learned that during COVID to make vaccination campaigns, information about the rules against contamination and so on. That worked when we knew how to frame our services and our information, and learn about the different communities and what they listened to, what did they trusted. So that made, every time there was a new surge in COVID, we worked this and we got the numbers down and vaccination up. So we know it works. When we now receive refugees from Ukraine, not as many as in Lithuania and Poland and Germany, but anyway, much more than we used to. We see that, okay, this open attitude works when it comes to private housing, when it gets a job for Ukrainians, for supporting the NGOs that the Ukrainians make, and for their cause. So this attitude of welcome works. We do that now in policies on kindergartens, because in some certain age groups, people with children with minority background do not use the kindergartens. When you know that kindergartens is, the first step in school, in education, so important. How do you reach the parents with this message? Do they trust the kindergartens? Is kindergartens something that estrange their children? And so on. We do that with the elderly policy, because there also is a lack of use of public services. So they don't trust the public services. And then the public services are not efficient. So we get this thinking in that we have to change. And when you talk now, we have these conferences and communication with business, with sports, NGOs. They all think the same way. How we make a sport club function and have members, okay, we have to change. Because these kids are not here, why are not the parents here? We have to change. Same with businesses. If you go to IKEA or other companies like that, they think the same way. So that is maybe where we have the most success in our policy for 20 years, that this message is really coming across. Because if you try all this work on diversity and just have the nice message, you don't get change. You have a course on, the importance of human rights. Everybody in the audience will say, okay, I'm good with that. I'm for human rights. It doesn't make anybody change. But you have to change because we have all this discrimination. Then you have to get into, okay, you are a teacher. You have all these people getting low grades. How do you want to change it? Then you have to change how you are a teacher. So to get this message across takes lots of time. But it's starting in very many different aspects of our Oslo life. So that is where we are. I think I've talked now for more than 10 minutes, so it's... But I think this is the same, I think, they did in Rome and Athens 2,000 years ago. They have to think the same way.
We've got to start with ourselves rather than looking outside of ourselves, which kind of brings me to a very... I don't think there's any question, let me put it this way, I don't think there's any question within the diversity space that's an easy question to answer. So you've probably got the hardest questions of everybody that I've asked. But in particular, when it comes to the notion of diversity, I think there's a lot of people, particularly in this room, who'd agree that it's a policy worth putting our effort behind. And yet, it's a bit of a thorny, sensitive subject. You don't quite know where to start. What can you say? What can't you say? Are you going to offend somebody? How do you create a foundation that allows for open educational dialogue to flourish so that change can happen?
Well, it's difficult. We have had some very difficult experience in Oslo with mentioned this attack on Oslo Pride in this year, or last year. We had also the terrorist attack in 2011. And it took 10 years to have some educated thoughts about that terrorist attack and what it was all about. And to have that, you have the I think we are more now prone, and politicians and leaders, to have this standpoint to see how this looks from the victim side, or the minority side, the weak part side, and understand why this is harmful. And then say that, okay, we have to make a stand, we have to say it's important for us, not to be good to somebody else, but to good for us, also as representatives of the majority who could say, okay, what's the problem?
Yeah, and so it really is about kind of almost putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, because that we sit in a position and we go, I don't understand why that's a problem, is kind of irrelevant. It's that it is experienced as a problem. And you've touched on, and I think this will be the last question I'm able to kind of squeeze in, you touched on some of the initiatives that you've done in Oslo, but can you give us maybe a couple of really practical things where a city can start to set an example for its citizens so that we can get this momentum?
I think what we've seen over these 20 years, that the city is not a bystander. The city is an actor, because this diversity or inclusive, to be that, is not a public service. It's something that goes into all kinds of relationships. It's something between people. And it's between people in society, but also between the city and its citizens. So to be conscious about this responsibility to not be a bystander, but because we used to be a bystander to the LGBT community 20 years ago. And then we started to support it with money. Then now we are participating. We are encouraging our employees to be part of, the whole week program and the parade. So, and also to the schools to put up the rainbow flag and so on. So we are participating. And that is also what we say, we have to react when something bad is happening, like the demonstrations we have now in Stockholm. I think the Quran burning, we have had that in Oslo also, but then we have to say that the city is not a bystander. We're just not looking at this, we do something, because it has consequences. And we have to look then at the freedom of speech. All these freedoms are regulated. We regulate the freedom of religion, for instance, the right to strike. All these things are regulated because we have to have the context and the consequences. Now you get in jail in Norway if you say that, for instance, I don't like what you do, God will find a tool to punish you. If you say that, you can get in jail in Norway. To talk about God's punishment or hell. And that's because these kinds of messages can get people to say, okay, I am a tool of God, so I will shoot somebody. And that has happened. So you have to go into these freedoms and be more educated about that. because freedom of religion is very important, and you should have that. Freedom of speech is very important, but you have to regulate and react to something. And the city cannot use the law or the police, but we use civic reactions. And we do that more and more in Oslo.
It's such a big topic, and we can only scratch the surface. But I'm hoping that this dialogue and presentation has given you stuff to think about and to continue these conversations. Thank you so much for joining us and taking the time to dive into what is a very deep topic. I would have loved to have spoken further for longer, but we've run out of time. So thank you, Toralv.